This is session number 8 for day 2. This is session number 7, entitled Breaking New Grounds to Encourage Atypical Approaches. It's a very interesting title for that. Mehek, do you think your approach is an atypical one?
I would say it's not. I think it's kind of what we do, isn't it? Like that's what social behavior change is about. It's about disruption.
Yeah, I mean, that's why atypical in a positive sense, in the sense it's innovative, it's different than what you usually do. And I think that's the whole idea of how do we actually look at this particular session, because one needs to be a little disruptive. Sometimes when you do routine or when you do more of the same, it sometimes doesn't actually reaches you or connects with you in a manner. Sometimes that might happen. Welcome to Vithika. Do I pronounce your name correctly, Vithika?
Yes, it's Vithika.
Vithika Yadav. Great to see you, Vithika. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Wonderful. I'm very excited to see these presentations, especially yours once, because that reminds me of a Hindi film song, right? I'm sure that was based on that, right?
No, it wasn't really based on that. Yeah, but
no, I'm just saying I'm good old man, so I remember good old film songs, which was actually called Kya Yahi Pyar Hai, if you remember.
Yes, yes.
And that's a very interesting.
That was also one of the reasons why we used that title.
No, I think it's a great idea. It's a great connect, and the feeling and the sentiment which evokes the connectivity which you want, it actually gets you immediately there. And people I mean, may or may not remember that song. Irrespective of that, it's a great great hook, which kind of brings you to the fact, and then a good entry point opens up for having a very interesting discussions.
Yes.
I'm sincerely looking to both these presentations. So without much ado, I see Priyanka there. Hi, Priyanka, Kainat, Khurshid. Am I getting the name sense? Anita, Vidya, Kirti, Bhavani. Hi, Bhavani. How are you doing? Long time.
Hey, Sanjeev. Glad to see you.
Mazhar and several other people are going to join. And I once again welcome you all. The house rules for these presentations are we will have both the presentations one after the other, and we will suggest and request you to hold your questions. And you can put your questions in the chat box after the first presentation is over, or even if you have read the abstract and the brief introduction. You might have some questions, or you might have read through the links that were provided. Please feel free to put those questions and observations in the chat box. And Vaishali is there, our volunteer. She is going to note down those questions and probably filter them out to get them to the presenters for question and answer. Let me introduce my speakers for today. We have Mehek Ali. She is going to present the first presentation, which is entitled Why We Are Not the Experts. And, you know, under the program section, I'm listed as Sanjeev Kumar, Dr. Sanjeev Kumar as SBCC experts. I'm beginning to doubt myself now that why are we not the experts? Mehek is a senior program manager at IIT Pakistan, where she leads the Community Engagement Collective. She has worked in education, mental health, gender, and community-based innovations in Pakistan since 2012 and has served as co-principal investigator on projects pertaining to people's lived experiences in tuberculosis, HIV, and COVID-19. She has led the design and implementation of several community projects focusing on specific health domains, adolescent well-being, women empowerment, community engagement, and learning paradigms. Welcome, Mehek. Sounds very interesting. And with her is Kausar. These are some of the domains I'm very much interested in. I work in India for over almost 30 years. Kausar, am I getting your name correct? Kausar S. Khan is co-director for the Community Engagement Collective in IIT Pakistan and technical advisor for several community-based projects, including projects focusing on lived experiences of HIV and psychosis. She has over 20 years experience in community-based work in the urban and rural poor, with focus on child malnutrition, gender-based violence, community participation. Her areas of research include health equity, promotion, health disparities and inequality, public health education and communication, and healthcare quality. With these two wonderful presenters, I will introduce Vithika when she comes to the second presentation. Let's have the presentation from Mehek, the recorded presentation, and then we will try to ask you the questions raised by the audience after both the presentations are over. Can we have the presentation recording, please? Thank you.
Hello, I'm Mehek Ali, part of the team at IRD Pakistan that is seeking to deepen the understanding of community engagement in public health and other social sectors. In this talk, I'll be exploring the ground realities of working on community health in Pakistan and why we are not the experts. What do you see when you look at this picture? Public health recognizes the role of ecosystems, how houses tightly packed together create environments for diseases to spread, how access to and use of clean water impacts health outcomes. But having moved away from the realm of social reform, public health interventions, and note the use of the word intervention here, may fall victim to symptomizing communities as passive sufferers. We may be forgetting the key role of social cohesion and capital, which exists in this image too, local systems that can be leveraged for improving health. If we acknowledge that health in fact does not exist in a vacuum, and that social determinants create a webbed system that promotes or degenerates well-being, then we also need to move away from notions that are entrenched in how things should be, and therefore choose to collaborate rather than intervene. Communities are typically viewed from a macro perspective, with their struggles generalized and efforts ignored. People are seen as patients, communities are seen as target audiences. The imposition of how things should be distorts their unique human experience and the intersections of their lived realities. The focus ends up being on mapping a pre-made solution onto a problem without contextual understanding of its origins, its cultural nuances, or the local systems. Acknowledging that health does not really exist in isolation, instead that reliable systems are required, we want to encourage development professionals to understand ways impoverished communities build systems on their own, or improve upon existing structures which are often invisible to practitioners and organizations coming in for service delivery. This acknowledgement of local hidden systems is two-pronged. One, it can strengthen health, education, and other interventions by integrating communities' own responses and actions from a cultural and contextual lens, that is, moving away from co-option to collective action. And it emancipates health workers, activists, practitioners, and organizations from the barriers, preconceived ideas, and the symptomizing quality that often accompanies planning programs and interventions for development, which reduces sustainability of the innovation. And arguably, the collective we of a community should also comprise of the people working with them on the challenge area. If we choose to work with communities rather than for communities or on communities, this allows us to co-identify what areas of concerns there are, what methodologies can work. Through a combination of participatory approaches and community competency building, health workers become part of the indigenous community and see their problems as they really are, rather than through the superimposed lens of an outsider. And this allows health workers and practitioners to represent the community's interests with agencies, and therefore develop programs that are most suited to those contexts and are therefore sustained. I'll briefly go over a few examples of how IRD has utilized community engagement principles to work alongside people that have embodied knowledge of their health contexts. Our qualitative research revealed that while some members in communities in Karachi were experiencing mild to moderate depression and anxiety, mental health was not categorically stated as a problem, but rather other factors such as accessibility of healthcare services, financial constraints, and relational challenges were acknowledged as barriers to positive health outcomes. IRD thus launched a mental health literacy project through outreach services, which helped communities articulate their experiences of mental health distress within the realm of their own social and emotional constructs. The project took an iterative approach whereby they learned that interactive sessions focused on lived experiences were more effective for critical dialogue, and that referrals to the nearby clinic were ineffective due to women's limited mobility and privacy concerns, and thus they developed an in-community lay counseling model instead. Building on this further, when we considered severe psychiatric conditions such as psychosis, through dialogue with those with lived experiences, we learned it was crucial to integrate familial and community care for those affected. we developed a participatory project which incorporated novel approaches of engagement such as theater of the oppressed, which enables community members to address biases and prejudice through an interactive medium regardless of their formal literacy, as well as a lived experiences advisory panel, which ensures representation in clinical settings to improve healthcare protocols for people with psychosis. This also enabled public and private health practitioners to see the gaps in their programs, as was outlined with those having embodied knowledge, thereby ultimately leading to a systems level change. Similarly, within research, protocols are typically developed by experts with degrees in the health topic, which are then rolled out in communities. And while community advisory boards are recommended for clinical research, they may not have representation from members who are actually from that community itself. At IRD, we took this a step forward and co-developed with the community an action group for tuberculosis research, where the group was formed utilizing socio-ecological principles. So it included people who had lived experiences such as cured TB patients, their caregivers, and the local and trusted health providers that they nominated. The Community Action Group has now gone on to develop its own mandate and autonomously conducts TB awareness sessions in their communities, coordinates screening camps, refers people to care where appropriate, and has recommended changes for research and hospital programs that encapsulates people's real needs. This demonstrates a shift from participation via consultation, such as in an advisory board, to collective action, which showcases agency. And finally, by merging the concept of immersive community action groups with health communication through digital and social media and below-the-line activities, IRD also launched an HIV destigmatization project, which focused on communities' priorities around their HIV status, which was not about medical care or treatment, but rather about reforming the essential social bonds they had, which is crucial for functional well-being in a collectivist culture such as Pakistan's. Through this HIV project, the voices of people with lived experiences were at the forefront, and they've taken collective action towards reintegrating into their communities via shared goal setting and advocacy efforts with government and local leaders to ensure improved health outcomes for people living with HIV. These examples showcase that an inclusive approach which considers indigenous responses and integration of homegrown solutions ensures that the local population always remains the pivotal stakeholder in actions and actively takes ownership for them. In the community life competence process, an adapted version of which is shown here, practitioners entering local spaces must work with the community to co-identify its priorities and the current resources they have. And this could include any formal or informal systems that may already exist. And this helps to address those concerns identified. It is becoming increasingly apparent that an isolated clinical model for health is not an appropriate intervention in low-resource settings, where social determinants of health create a webbed system for which an interdisciplinary approach is likely much more suitable. Learning about homegrown solutions from local contexts provides important information for practitioners to adapt and apply such approaches in other similar contexts, thereby questioning the traditional colonized model of healthcare delivery. This inevitably strengthens innovations. Being integrated into existing mechanisms allows health innovations to be better accessed, adopted, and utilized by local populations, thus generating a sustainable and hopefully an evolving solution. Such an approach can strengthen networks between professionals and the local experts who have embodied knowledge, which allows building new solutions for healthcare delivery in challenging contexts. This also enables the community and health practitioners to connect the dots necessary for human development in contextually diverse settings. This critical engagement mechanism has allowed IRD to launch its Community Engagement Collective, which aims to walk with the community, trace its journey, and shoulder their obstacles, and generate a learning hub to transfer knowledge from one community to another, thereby redefining what it means to be an expert in the field. We are constantly indebted to the communities we seek to collaborate with, and we hope to continue to learn and evolve our understanding of community engagement within the public health sector and beyond, recognizing that we are not the experts. So thank you for listening, and please connect with us if you have any further questions or ideas that you would like to share about your experiences or why you feel that you are not the expert. Thank you.
Very interesting and a diverse domain from real HIVs to TB to psychosis, and very interesting construct from typologies to the steps which you said. I'm particularly intrigued about the step 5 is called dream analysis. Maybe we'll take the question later, but it's very interesting. I'm reminded of a project which we did where it was called community as assets, not as gap analysis or need analysis kind of a thing. Communities have assets, communities have solutions. So how we look at community from community's perspective and not outside, inside kind of a perspective. It's a very interesting construct and articulation. I'd love to discuss that after the second presentation we have done. But thank you very much. It was a very eloquent, very crisp, as well as very insightful presentation. Thank you. Okay, so let's go to the second presentation, which I find equally interesting and challenging to listen, and with some very catchy lines. Is this love? Hashtag is this love? The future of online campaigns for social change, learning from hashtag is this love campaign to address intimate partner violence in India by Surabhi, Srivastava and Vithika, Yadav. I have a little description for Vithika here. I would like you to introduce Vithika so that we are able to understand the context where she's coming from and the kind of huge experience which is embodied in this particular project and this experiment. Vithika is an entry slavery, sexual rights and gender rights in India to give complete, honest and unbiased information on love, sex and relationships. In other words, sexual and reproductive health and rights of young people in Hindi and English language. She is also the founder of Teen Book, a comprehensive life skills resource hub for adolescents, parents, and teachers. Sorry, she is the chair of Global Advisory Board on Sexual Health and Wellbeing, powered by Durex. She is also one of the 120 under 40 new generation family planning leaders in the world. Family planning, adolescent, sexual and reproductive health has been one of my interest areas in the last so many years in different projects and different settings. I'm very excited to listen to your presentation and get some insights and help me widen my scope and probably look at things from a very new and different perspectives. Welcome, Vithika, and look forward to hearing your presentation and then followed by some interesting questions and discussion points. Can we have the presentation, please?
To change, I will be presenting learnings from Love Matters India's campaign on intimate partner violence called Is This Love? Love Matters is a global digital social initiative, and we work at the intersection of media and public health. We provide open, honest, pleasure-positive, non-judgmental and science-based information to young people using innovative media formats. And we specialize in our communication on sexual and reproductive health and rights for young people. Social listening is one of the most important tools that we use at Love Matters India to inform our projects and campaigns. When we started our work on this campaign on intimate partner violence, first and foremost, we wanted to hear from young people how they looked at violence in relationships and what was their understanding of violence in relationships. What we found out was that controlling behavior was seen as normalized. There was a high acceptance of controlling behavior in relationships. Physical and sexual violence was seen as more damaging than emotional violence, and there was also high acceptance that led to underreporting. So what they thought as care and love was essentially control in relationships. We had some key insights for the campaign. The fact that we had to focus on psychological aspects of violence, the fact that we wanted to focus on young unmarried couples and their relationships, and the fact that popular culture in Bollywood was a huge influence. Based on these insights, we also narrowed down our audience, which was of 18 to 35-year-old young people focused on unmarried young couples in tier 1 and tier 2 cities and metros speaking English and Hindi. And this was the audience that was not really aware of the link between controlling behavior and intimate partner violence, and who often confused control for care in relationships. Oh, he cares for you so much. He does every little thing for you. He must really love you. How often have we heard these lines where control masquerades under the socially accepted notions of care? Through Is This Love campaign, we helped young people understand the difference between care and control and many such hard to navigate aspects of romantic relationship. What we intended to do was to raise awareness and encourage people to reflect on their own relationships and how they looked at violence in their relationships. We really wanted to focus on psychological and emotional harm, which is often not seen as violence in relationships. And we wanted to focus on young Indian unmarried couples who found it extremely difficult to talk about what they might be experiencing in their relationships. When we started work on this campaign, we realized that we had to speak the language of young people and we had to speak to them directly. As a result of the extensive research that we had done, we found out how young people spoke about relationships and relationship issues. Instead of using intimate partner violence as the terminology to talk to people about violence in relationships, we started to talk about toxic relationships and getting their responses on how they looked at control and care in relationships. With a multi-component online campaign strategy, which used both website and social media, the objective of the campaign for us was to reach and engage with young people on intimate partner violence. Based on the insights from the target audience, we made use of Bollywood themes as a popular cultural reference for the overall campaign and additionally used personal narratives and stories, a meme generator, interactive quizzes, and a discussion board to create a highly engaging campaign strategy. Consent emerged as an important theme when we spoke to young people about violence in relationships. Now, what we also realized was that consent can be a really tricky concept, especially in Indian settings where personal boundaries are often hard to distinguish in all relationships. How do you explain consent in such a situation? What we did was to use personal stories that young people could relate to. And at Love Matters India, we take pride in telling stories. Through Is This Love campaign, we intended to disrupt public spaces and encourage conversations on intimate partner violence. With this intention, we also produced India's first virtual reality film on intimate partner violence, where we invited young people to step into the shoes of young Anuja and experience her dilemmas as she waded through ups and downs of her relationship with Manoj. The film broke taboo around intimate partner violence by using virtual reality in public installations to narrate a powerful story and connect it with young people. Now, the campaign's results framework was centered on two main objectives. One, engaging young people in an online dialogue on intimate partner violence. And secondly, their awareness, knowledge, and attitudes around intimate partner violence will be improved. Our theory of change also outlined how the change process was expected to work. One, by implementing an innovative campaign, which will lead users to accessing campaign content and engaging in an online discussion, which subsequently improves their knowledge and encourages them to reflect on their own attitudes and their own relationships, and changes their behavior so that they are able to set boundaries and claim healthy and loving relationships. Is This Love campaign provided us with a wealth of lessons learned and formed an excellent basis for our follow-up campaigns and further research. What we learned was that online interventions on taboo and sensitive topics like intimate partner violence require a longer duration to build up and sustain engagement with young people in order to influence their awareness, knowledge, attitudes, and ultimately behavior change. What we also learned was that experimental engagement formats like memes and videos have been highly effective in reaching and engaging young people, and we recommend considering these in future campaigns on sensitive topics and paying particular attention to what formats are popular among young people at the time. This also includes gathering feedback from young people on what would work best if we were to do a similar campaign again. We also learned that although engagement on intimate partner violence was highly effective, the click-through rate to informative IPV material was actually very limited. To ensure that young people not only engage with the material, but also access information that will increase their awareness and knowledge, we recommend strategizing how to balance out triggering engagement and providing information. So for example, through experimenting with mixing engagement and informative posts on Facebook, or by implementing a moderation strategy to follow up on conversations with fact-based information. An offline campaign strategy can help in building and connecting young people to existing Love Matters India online platforms. And this is what we learned through our public display of virtual reality film on intimate partner violence. And it also helped us delve further into the nuances of IPV through the discussions we had in the offline spaces. These conversations and perspectives are very, very important because they can be incorporated into content and strategy development for the online component of the campaign. Despite technical and ethical limitations in tracking users throughout the campaign, we should have a strategy in place to ensure that changes in awareness, knowledge, attitudes, and behavior can be accurately tracked. A practical way of doing this is by securing participants' personal contact information rather than relying on anonymous user data and unpaired data sets. We also learned that the combination of the quantitative platform analytics and quizzes with the qualitative sentiment analysis was a strong approach and has given us a thorough understanding of how users interacted with our campaign. This not only tells us how successful the campaign has been, but also gives us ample inspiration for future campaigns and engagement strategies. Thank you.
Sanjeev, you're on mute.
Even the mics cannot used to mute me. Now the technology can mute me. You know, this is a technology violence, I must say. Thank you. I was just saying, what a diverse range of atypical, disruptive, innovative intervention designs, and into such diverse domains. I myself, you know, itching to ask so many questions. I'm sure, Priyanka, I can read on our foreheads about 500 questions running. But let's start with the questions which are being asked by our audience first. And I think Vidya asks this first question about, although it has been responded to Mehek. And that typology was very interesting, Mehek. You know, I was remembered of one particular tool which was called Partnership Ladder, when we used to do very interesting stuff of what real partnership actually means and not just tokenism. So Vidya is saying co-option to community action is the only way forward for sustainable development. Let me just extend this question. I understand this is a staged, graduated process. But does this go from here to here, or how does it work? I mean, do we really necessarily have to go from co-option to cooperation or community action, or there are different entry points which sometimes you feel are possible?
I think one of the things is that it kind of depends on what type of intervention or innovation you're doing. Sometimes for certain things, you actually probably do want co-option. So for example, if you do have something like child abuse, you might choose that I don't want to necessarily engage in a certain way. I mean, it depends on what your goal is. But I think it's not necessary that you have to go through each of the stages. You kind of define the type of engagement you want to do pertaining to that issue. In our work, we prefer to take lived experiences and a participatory approach. So we typically veer towards the broader side of the spectrum where we're looking at collective action, because we feel that without that embodied knowledge, and I think this is exactly what Vithika's work has also done, is that you work with experiences of people who truly have that knowledge in order to cultivate social and behavioral change. Because there's intrinsic motivation or buy-in, it's not going to happen. And I feel like with things like co-option, there is no intrinsic motivation or self-efficacy to be part of or to want to change in any way. So yeah, I don't think it's like that you have to go step by step. It would depend on what type of engagement you want to do pertaining to the social cause or public health cause you want to work on.
Thank you.
Or that the community perhaps, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's very interesting. Although I'm not seeing another question to you, but I have a question on the step 5, I think, which is called dream analysis. Is this something, I mean, I'm a little intrigued. Is it like an aspirational kind of an analysis, or what you wish and hope for, or see as a larger picture or a bigger domain kind of a thing? Is it kind of, word association kind of a work? I'm a little intrigued. Would you help us kind of understand what is it, and how did you kind of find it interesting and useful in the context you were actually conducting that?
Of course. So we came across, we've been very fortunate to be working with collaborators who have used the SALT method, if anyone is familiar with that. But the SALT method is the community life competence process. This has been used in South Asia very well as well, with colleagues I'm sure you might know, Ritu Nanda, etc. They've been able to use it for improving maternal child care health. And the process entails that when you talk about dream analysis, what you're essentially doing is that the community will identify their collective vision around a topic. So the idea is that you identify goals or dreams that you want your community to be able to achieve in 5 years, 10 years, however long. And it starts with an individual reflection. So what is my dream for my community? And then I work with my peers to identify what our collective goal would be. And only once the community has defined what their priority or dream is, would they really be able to work towards concrete actions to achieving it. Unfortunately, sometimes when we impose dreams or impose goals onto communities, the follow through on them is poor. So until the community themselves is able to identify what they want to achieve, they won't be able to take any concrete actions towards it. So that's what the dream analysis bit is. Once you identify your dreams, you assess where you lie in terms of the priority. What do I need to do to achieve this dream? What are the types of actions that I need to take? Who are the resources that I can connect with for this? So the dream analysis is a really complex process and can sometimes take months to actually accomplish. But it's quite a broad process, and I'd have to do a deep dive into the CLCP to articulate it well. But I'm happy to share resources on the chat here.
Wonderful. Very interesting. I am seeing Priyanka beaming. Would you like to come in before we go to Vithika? You have some aspects you want to share. Some of your work has that kind of elements very much embedded there, Priyanka.
Yeah, but I'm just fascinated to hear Mehek and Vithika talk about their work. I actually had a couple of questions for Vithika, so I'll wait for you to finish the engagement with Mehek, and then we can move on to, to other questions.
All right. I let me do that. Let me just go to Vithika. And Mehek has already commented on your fascinating work, Vithika. She's saying we are trying something similar for increasing vaccine confidence and have merged on-ground community engagement with mass social media campaigns to promote uptake of vaccines. Would you love to learn more from you or from your experience? I mean, I understand that the contexts are interestingly different, but what you did and used and achieved in that context we were working, is that transportable or to something like what Vithika Mehek is suggesting, and in what way that could be possible and transformed or adopted?
Absolutely. One, it is possible. And secondly, we have actually led the campaign for young people in India on vaccine hesitancy and COVID appropriate behavior. So we actually ran the My Story campaign in partnership with Facebook, which has, which has over 80 million reach among young people. And we've had some, PLS surveys, which have showed some interesting results. But I would also say that it was one of the campaigns. I mean, I feel every campaign and what we learn from campaigns have different learnings for us. And interestingly, the one that we did on vaccine hesitancy, where we thought the approaches that we use in our campaigns, and Bollywood as a huge influencer of popular culture, actually did not work that well for COVID. It was surprising that we had put out, 2 test cases. We wanted to, we thought we're in the business, we know what young people like, let's have Bollywood memes and, sort of all of that talking about COVID appropriate behavior. And we put that out, and we put out an information post, which was, sort of building hope and confidence around how vaccine worked in context of polio, and how, there is also hope and there is light at the end of the tunnel. And actually the second one worked really, really well. It was a huge surprise for us. So I mean, I think in the work that we do with young people and in digital spaces, we have to constantly test our assumptions. That's the big learning, even when we are trying to replicate one campaign learnings into the other, and we feel, yes, this is something that will work. I still feel every time it's a test case, and you really have to think on your feet, and you really have to, sort of adapt to different situations.
Thank you, Vithika. I almost felt when you said when we know what young people want or know, with Mehek almost jumped to the fact that her title was saying, "Why are we not the experts?" So didn't I tell you that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that we always have to hear from them, and young people are not a homogeneous group, right? And it's fast changing. There is new audience joining. So I think one is always learning. Ask them the questions, let them speak, let them tell you what they feel about issues, what are their struggles, what are their challenges, how do they want information, what will really work for them. That's really been our learning graph. Every time we do a campaign, of course, there are learnings that we take forward, but every time we feel, this is what we thought, but this is something different for us. But yeah, I think in the kind of work that we do as campaigners, right, and in digital spaces, an important skill is that you're able to, when you plan ahead, and then you're able to, sort of improvise on the go, on the way. And I think as campaigns for social change in digital spaces is all about that. You can plan as much as you want, but you always have to be ready to improvise while the campaigns are on.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. There's another question to you, Mehek. How do you think that local expertise and community ownership can be strengthened over and above what you just said? Sometimes, we do come back with knowledge, body, experiences, from a different location, geography, project, sector, and things like that. So how do we unlearn that probably in some way or the other, but still strengthen the community ownership?
I think a large part of it is also kind of reflexive on our own parts. So we have to be able to kind of step back. I think there's this big role in the development sector that we feel like we need to take control and manage things, but sometimes you also have to let an organic growth occur. So that means creating safe spaces, which enables brave spaces. And I think that kind of allows the community to take that agency and dynamic forward themselves. There is this notion that as experts or people who study development work, something that we've done in the West or something that we've done, for example, even in as well, Vithika was saying that it's not a homogenous group. So something that might work in Southern India might not work in Northern India. And that's something that we are constantly learning as well, that we have to really contextualize and take an iterative approach. So I would say that in order to further enhance community ownership, we have to create a safe space and allow brave spaces to occur naturally, which means that they might disrupt have historically set up, but we set it up in a way that was not systemically equitable, that might have further disenfranchised certain communities. So I think we have to also be able to take a step back and be like, whoa, we stake. And I think, especially when I think back to the way that the COVID pandemic has been handled, I think as public health practitioners, we have not acknowledged our mistakes in how we rolled out the campaigns, or how we have rolled out vaccine drives, or how we've disseminated information and done a lot of coercion and to ensure that people maintain safe protocols. So I think even just acknowledging our own mistakes is a step towards improving this system. But that's just my humble opinion.
Yeah, I know it's sometimes even much more difficult to have step back rather than step forward. We are always used to using step forward, but stepping back and unlearning is quite a challenging task, really. Thank you. Vithika has asked, to Vithika, there is a question. What challenges did you face to shift the focus from domestic DV to IPV as a private matter? How does one learn not to be toxic in a relationship? I had a related question. You said to avoid IPV, you use the phrase toxic relationship. Does that have problem of its own, that connotation, and add it to this question?
I mean, responding to the first question in terms of domestic violence and how we looked at intimate partner violence, I think, part of the research that we had done, second research that we did on how people looked at violence in relationships, and speaking to young people, what we found out was that largely violence was looked at in context of marital relationships. And for young people, they thought it was extremely difficult to even articulate what they thought about their own relationships, because for most part, they felt they cannot go and speak to their parents about it. The response was most likely to be, is this why you go to school or college? And, why are you even talking about it? So there was often this fear of no one understanding, or is this even a problem, that needs to be talked about. And the other thing was, sort of how young people in relationships, and I'm talking about not only heterosexual relationships, I'm talking about the fact that there was absolutely no conversation around violence in same-sex relationships. And that area was, just sort of nobody talked about it. And the approach really was to have couples speak up and talk about their experiences. But I think the bigger challenge was the fact that do they even identify that as a problem? And intimate partner violence, and I still remember, if anybody would go and type IPV on Google, it would talk about polio vaccination. There was no reference to intimate partner violence back in, when we did this campaign. So that really was a starting point, that why are we, how do we make this issue visible? And we have to talk about unmarried couples, we have to talk about young people in relationships, and that's how we brought out the experiences. I think that the difficult thing was to, and I think that we found even during this campaign, was the challenge that physical form of abuse was seen as problematic, but they were finding it extremely difficult to unpack and to really understand, but how is someone else taking financial decisions for me violence? It's about somebody cares for me, and it is okay, not really realizing. And this was not to tell people, oh my God, this is violence and this is how you need to feel about it because somebody else is taking decisions for you, but to really be able to reflect on their own relationships, that were they talking about it, were they communicating, did they have an equal say in terms of the decisions that they were making. And financial, I mean, this is also that came out from a lot of stories that we had collected, that a lot of girls often talked about the fact that, oh, always like to check with my boyfriend where to invest or where do I want to sort of spend, because he thinks that men are always better at handling finances. So there was a lot of these social norms that we could hear, and we could sort of and that is what we tried to do. When we put out this Kya Yahi Pyar Hai campaign, we really tried to put out different forms of violence and situations out there, and for people to step into their shoes and just experience those situations and feel, do they feel the same thing in their own relationships? Probably not. So for us, it was not about telling people that, okay, this is how you have to identify violence in relationship, but this is perhaps what toxic masculinity sort of looks like. These are harmful social norms. We often do not question things around us, and this is where I think the use of the word toxic came in to talk about healthy and unhealthy relationship, but a terminology that did stick with people. And of course, there was a lot of I would say, a lot of responses toward the campaign saying that, you're trying very hard to make a point. This is not really violence. You're really trying to tell people that this is violence, but perhaps this is not violence. And I think the success was the fact that people started talking about something. Right? For us, the success was not really just about, okay, how many people changed their behavior, whatever. The fact that people were questioning it, people were talking about something that was just not talked about. Digital spaces are public spaces, and there are no conversations around a lot of topics that we are uncomfortable with, right? So I think that really was the power of the campaign, and why we picked up on toxic masculinity and the word toxic, to just kind of make it much more conversational with people.
I'm very conscious to even raise the question that, was it always toxic masculinity, or the other way around also you explored?
Other way around as well, actually, other way around as well. And there were multiple situations that were put out there. And as a part of those series, we encouraged people to submit their stories and their experiences. So we actually heard from everyone, so it was, we were quite aware that, this can be taken as a campaign where we are only talking about men being a problem, or that's the issue, but that really wasn't the point. We really tried to sort of talk about all forms of violence and how people looked at their relationships. Yeah. So again, there's a huge influence in terms of popular culture and Bollywood and how obsessive behavior around, controlling your partner. Where are you? Who are you with? These are little things, in context of how we talk about healthy relationships and what we perhaps need to know about.
Look forward to read and hear more about that at all. There's another question from, I think, to Mehek, or observation from Usman, I think. Activating communities to move from individual goals to collective outcomes, and then self-action plans by communities to achieve the same.
I think Usman was referring to when we were talking about the dream analysis, because that's when he had messaged.
Right. Yeah, I mean, seems to have missed some portion, but I think that is where it was going around. Vithika, there's a question. Have you seen any backlash of any sort, especially from young people?
Not really, but there were obviously there were a lot of people who were unhappy with what we were trying to say and talk about, like really like what I just discussed. So there wasn't, I wouldn't call that backlash, but I would actually call that success of the program, because the moment people start talking about it and questioning and reporting to Facebook and other other digital channels that this content needs to be taken down because it is offensive, that's a good sign. That means that people, we are making people uncomfortable. We are making people talk about something that is not talked about. And even when we did the the VR installations across Delhi metro stations, where it was screened for 10 days straight, there was just, everybody participated. There were people who obviously were very, obviously very uncomfortable with what was being shown and did talk about it. But for us, the idea was to let them share their experiences. For us, it was, you're having this immersive experience, and we want to hear from you about what you feel about it, and really just leave it there, because that was also a lot of important content for us to feed into future campaigns and how we talk about intimate partner violence. But no backlash. Actually, it was pretty smooth in Delhi and Mumbai, both the cities, and with the audience that we covered.
Was there a difference between the reactions in Delhi versus Mumbai? Just a curiosity. I lived in both spaces. I'm just curious.
There was. Yeah, we had many more angry men in Delhi. Who were upset. Yeah, and no biases there, because this was really out in public spaces. But that's what we saw. We also, this was interesting because when we were doing these installations in the metro stations, it was about people in all age groups coming and having that experience. We didn't want to restrict it to only young people, because we also wanted to see how people in different age groups feel about it. And we felt that middle-aged men were usually the ones who were very, very upset about it. And
very old men like me may not be, middle-aged, maybe a little bit more.
Yeah, they seem to be very upset about it, and wanting to have a lot of conversation around it.
But why do you think the middle-aged men were so more upset, so to say? I'm just trying to be a little analytical.
I mean, it's not something that we really investigated, but we really thought that that's I mean, I think much older as well, but when you're at a certain age, when you're trying to challenge something that you have lived with for most part of your life, you're very uncomfortable changing the way you think, and you also feel that this is sort of challenging their authority and their power in some ways, right? And they relate it with it's about social power and structures. So it is also about how can young people tell you, of course it's a young team and people there, but also this is all crap, this is, you are the ones who are responsible for corrupting the next generation, younger generation.
Corrupting the next generation, my God.
Yeah. And then everything went back to Love Matters, because they were very quick at going through the website and saying, oh my God, this is definitely against Indian culture. This is so explicit, and you're talking about sex and God knows what not. So yeah, so I think that made people, and especially in that age group, quite uncomfortable.
Mehek, does that actually tell you that older people are also not the experts in relationships and sexuality, and sometimes they do feel so?
I mean, so we specifically haven't looked at expressions of sexuality in our work, but in our work in gender, yes, we have seen that a lot of power dynamics are often controlled by older people. So even in Pakistan, typically when we work in interior Sindh, for example, decision makers in the household are usually not even the husbands, it's the mother-in-law. So there is often like a power dynamic, and so it's not gender specific, it's often just age specific. So who is the matriarch, who is the person who has power and control, and typically that's an age association. So with things like health uptake behaviors, like taking your child to the hospital, the mother will first ask her mother-in-law that I don't think my child is well, so should I take them or not? And the mother-in-law will often say, no, use this totka or like home remedy and your child should be fine. I raised my kid this way and look how well they've turned out. But in fact, we have to recognize that environments have changed a lot. The way that social relationships exist and social capital exists in a lot of communities has evolved. And gender-based violence had the face and nature of gender-based violence has also changed. And with the advent of digital technologies, the way that perpetrators penetrate spaces is quite dangerous. And I think it's still something that we're learning and trying to address.
Absolutely. I know. I think that's a very interesting and area of analysis and newer sites. There is another question, Vithika. Your kya yahi pyar has kind of churned people up and down. There are 6 more questions, and I don't even have 6 minutes. How do you make people understand? You have partially answered that question, but let me still put it. How do you make people understand that violence is more than a slap or a physical battering, but also emotional and psychological abuse, for the matter that economic through online campaign? I mean, the question is, how do you do this with an online campaign? With an offline one can do that, especially with IPC and social mobilization and mass media and offline media kind of stuff. But there is a notion that violence is always physical, because it has visible scars. I am reminded of the movie Thappad. You remember that?
Yes. And that really has
Mehek,
been...
you should watch that movie.
I've seen it. It's very good.
Yeah, Vithika.
Yeah. So this really was the big problem, right? I mean, physical violence and any, is essentially something that you can see is considered sign of abuse. And I guess a lot of information that was put out, even on domestic violence by campaigns, was largely around that. Verbal abuse, financial abuse, other aspects of abuse were not really explored. And at the same time, a lot of that was normalized when we talk about, Bollywood and popular culture. So obviously you leave people confused. It's not like people have these notions and that they, sort of grow up with. It's really the society, the exposure that we have, popular culture, that normalizes a lot of things around us. And for us, really persuasive storytelling is at the heart of what we do. So for us, it was not the point that, we have to tell people that this is abuse. And we really didn't want to do that, because we didn't want to come across as preaching people and telling them, oh, you know what, this is violence and this is violence, but really give them, stories and situations which made them reflect and think about their own relationships, and just leave it there with the question, do you think this is care or do you think this is control? And that was the whole idea with the
that seems like a very difficult, nuanced choice. Is it as straightforward and boxy as control and care for somebody to kind of take sides or take an opinion? I mean, that seems on a face value very interesting, but to somebody who's not into that vocabulary or discussion or orientation, to kind of box myself, this is care. And this is a classical debate. What is care for me is control for you. In Indian Hindi literature, somewhere around, we used to take these sessions that अगर पत्नी ये बोलती है कि बहुत दिनों से ना मेरा पति मुझे प्यार नहीं करता क्योंकि बड़े दिनों से उसने मुझे मारा नहीं. So it's a very difficult kind of a transition to care versus control. Is this as clear-cut as this?
No, it is actually tricky, and you have to try different formats. One of the formats that worked extremely well for us was to make a short video which was about verbal abuse, where you could only see a girl and there was just statements from the boyfriend, and with every statement there was a mark on on her face. Yeah, on the partner. And that was just, that's just how we projected a verbal abuse, that it is abuse. So it's also about, again, something that is hurtful for one cannot necessarily be hurtful for another person. And that is not where we can define, what is abuse and not abuse for you, but, sort of really questioning some of the things that are often normalized in relationships. A lot of times, just the fact that, oh, you're being, you're dressing up to impress someone, is this, why do you need to, sort of do that? Now, some people can find it insulting, and some people might just say, it was just a statement. I really don't think that this was insulting. And this is also not to say that this is abuse, but this is just some signs you have to, you have to be aware of. And you have to communicate about these things in your relationship. And this is also not to say that, it is about men and telling the men and boys that this is how you are, this is the way you speak, because most often men are very confused. What did I actually say? Was there something wrong with that? Because they don't know any better, right? Why is consent so tricky? We often talk about, consent and yes and no, but honestly, in real life, it is very tricky. And it is, you really have to unpack it in a way where people can really understand nuances around consent, what it means. Because from what we hear from young people, they often struggle. They really, we had so many responses from men and boys where they felt extremely bad about their behavior. And they said that, I've never really reflected on my own behavior as such. But this makes me feel really bad. Or it really makes me feel that maybe there are certain things that I need to change. So it was not really about what is right and wrong, but we really wanted to, really leave people with what perhaps are the signs of unhealthy relationship and what it can lead to.
Very interesting. Mehek has a very interesting question to you. Did you unpack these nuances with young people themselves, like internal dissemination with the groups you collected preliminary data from?
Yes, we did. And it was very interesting because this exercise actually informed us about a lot of categories which we had not covered in our campaign. So sexting and especially revenge porn, information that came out from young people was actually something that informed our next campaign, which really just focused on revenge porn. So unpacking these nuances with young people really was, something that gave us the wealth of information around how to look at the content and how to look at specific topics in future campaigns, which was around, revenge porn, and how we picked that up with young people.
I just wanted to add that what I really enjoyed about the previous point that you were making was that the idea is to just pose the question to the audience, and then it depends on how they want to take that forward. So that reflexivity and internal recognition of internal biases. And in non-digital spaces, we've been doing this through an activity called Theatre of the Oppressed, which is based on Augusto Boal's dramatics, which feeds off of Paulo Freire's pedagogy of the oppressed. So the idea is that through a theater performance, we've used this for HIV and discrimination, for TB, and for psychosis. So the idea is to just present an image or a stage performance with a monologue, and then you pause, and then the fourth wall is broken by a community member who comes on and takes the role of someone in that screen or in that performance. So what that does is it enables one to have that internal reflection, and then by participating in that performance themselves, it then gives other audience members to say, no, I wouldn't have done this way, or I disagree, or I agree. And I think that critical dialogue is really impactful, and I would imagine that it would translate so well on digital spaces as well.
Absolutely. And I think that's just beautiful to think about, the way you're looking at theater performance, but also giving an opportunity for people to actually step into the shoes of a character and be, sort of live that character. It really, it really helps them understand and reflect on their relationships, as well as the audience to make a connect, sort of, would I do the same thing? Would I act different? Or why wouldn't I do that? And just leave them with that. The idea is just to leave them with that thought. And that really was perhaps what we tried to do with the Kya Yahi Pyar Hai campaign.
I have just one last question. Since I saw some very interesting memes with Bollywood guys and Bollywood heroes and some of those dialogues, perhaps. If somebody was sitting on this panel from that side, they'd say Bollywood is always such a soft target to blame for everything and anything in the country, in the society, when people think that these stereotypical, patriarchal, and probably stalkers are being actually perpetuated. I mean, is there a particular design in actually using those examples and those visuals or those macho guys imagery there? How significant is that? And how, I mean, what does the research tell you? And does that also sometimes, you know, I do not know, unfairly targets the storytelling which the Bollywood guys do?
Great question. One, there will always be people who will be upset with what you do, you know, and I mean, I think with Bollywood, you know, actors, we need to understand it's a business, right? And for them, it is really about cashing on what's popular, you know, what works with people. I don't remember this latest movie, Kabir, some Shahid Kapoor movie that had come. I don't remember the name now, but it was such a rage, right? And there was a whole controversy around it, that how the character was versus how, you know, how violent he was, and, you know, sort of all of that. And that's really where you see, I mean, Bollywood has, you know, it has a lot of power. So using that for content, using these characters and these dialogues worked extremely well in the campaign. One, because there is huge recall. And even if people are upset with what they're doing, they will interact, right? They will look at it and they'll be like, you know what, you're spoiling the fun. You have to be serious all the time. It was just a movie. And that really gives you an opportunity to actually start a conversation. What is just a movie or film for you also translates into something else in real life. So really, you know, sort of having conversations and really getting them to, you know, just start a conversation on something. These I think these characters and these dialogues are extremely powerful. They're also good because you know, I mean, you can actually catch on certain trends and hashtags and characters. So that really works very well, you know, when we're looking at digital algorithms and hashtags and stuff. And yes, it is something that is relatable for audience. So to start conversation.
But what about television? Television is even much more stereotyping and probably using IPV in a very interestingly different context. I mean, Indian soap operas, for example, or I'm not giving you the name that I'll be probably framed by my Bombay friends that they will not me work anymore. But the television space or the web series space or the Netflix space is equally problematic in so many different ways.
I completely agree, and which is why every time we have run a campaign, we have actually reached out to Bollywood actors. We've reached out to them, you know, through messages, and, you know, how they would want to be involved, because the idea is not to just blame them or shame them, but the idea is that can we actually have conversations around it, and the fact that whatever they say holds a lot of weight, you know, for people. So we've had people like Farhan Akhtar who have joined the campaign, and you know who have sort of pledged also in certain ways in terms of
sorry to intervene. What's the point in getting Farhan? Why don't you get Ranveer? Because Ranveer is much more, you're using Ranveer in your pictures and you are taking quotes from Farhan, who is already known to have mustache campaigns and murd campaigns, you know, come on.
True, it's true. No, I completely agree. I would love to have Ranveer. It's just that they never respond to your requests.
No, but that's the point. You have to negotiate and work with them. I mean, I'm a little concerned. I worked in industry for a very long time.
No, I completely.
Mehek seems to have time constraints. Mehek, I can see that. Mehek, this is such an interesting conversation. You can forget about lunch. You know, the reason why why I'm stretching. Yeah, go ahead.
What you're talking about, because Pakistan recently, our television advisory board, I don't know if I should say this, but like you can read about it online. They said that, for example, scenes where a husband and wife are caressing or hugging are not allowed to be showcased, but they will broadcast intimate partner violence still. So a slap will come on TV, but hugs cannot. So I think that censorship is like a big issue for sure. So there's a lot that I feel is translating here.
I fully agree. But you know, the reason why I'm saying so is because, you know, there's no point in transforming the transformed, right? And that's the reason why I asked this question. There are Ranveer has probably 100 times more following than Farhan, for example. Like Farhan is known to be a sensible guy. Not that the other guy is not sensible and colorful, but the point is that if we are not able to reach out to, you know, we used to do these programs when I worked in HIV programs to actually work with script writers of television shows to actually integrate storylines and characters within their popular culture, Ekta Kapoor type serials, for example, and not into the Balika Vadhu kind of serials, because the TRP and the rating for, let's say, the popular shows is 100 times more, right? So I'm just, this is an area of interest to me, and probably I'm getting a little more ahead of me, for example. But I think this is something which, and I did work on the other side of people who work on domestic violence, especially in an organization in Pune, which works with men only to overcome intimate partner violence. They don't work with women. Of course, it's a given that there are a number of other people who are empowering and working on that side. But there are very few organizations that work with boys and men, like ICRW or people, Equal Community Foundation and things like that. But that's an area which sometimes gets little overlooked or comes as a add-on. Sorry to say that.
No. I mean, I think it's true, but at Love Matters, our sort of our key audiences of men and boys, which is why the way we package what we package and how we talk to men and boys in that audience is extremely important for us. I agree. I think something that we have not been able to crack is how to get these popular Bollywood celebrities and sort of people on board. It's just a skill that we do not have in-house in the organization, because we're a fairly small organization, and we do not know how do you approach them for anything. Generally they would ask for certain budgets and money, and really
nothing. No. It's a question of your negotiation skills, and Mehek can actually get you this typology of engagement so that all these guys will probably come running to you instead of, the Farhan Akhtar types.
I would love to learn from you, Mehek. I would love to, sort of, I think that's something that I would, I often don't try hard. Because you don't know, there are certain things that you don't understand, and as a campaigner, as an activist, I feel like we've given out the communication, we have sent them the messages. What else do we need to do? How do we convince them to be part of this campaign? And especially when Love Matters is a big brand. It's not only known in India but around the world.
You are associated with Durex, and Ranveer is associated with Durex.
Yes, yeah, but he's just stopped doing these ads since he got married. And Durex.
He should do it all the more.
I know, that was just very, very strange. Although, I think he was doing some cool stuff. And especially with Durex, if one follows their social media, they are just doing kick-ass stuff. Like, it's really, really good and really powerful. But yeah, again, we haven't had Ranveer come and speak about things that we would want him to talk about. But we have had some other people, who've done some kind of cool stuff. But I think it's, I don't know how to say this, but it was much easier for us to get Swara Bhaskar come and talk about, female pleasure. But we couldn't get any of these A-listers or Alia Bhatt to come and talk about it. I think things are changing.
Let's try that. Let's meet and see if we can do that. But I see it's already 1:05. Oh my God, this is amazing. This is session with the least number of presentations with the maximum engagement and maximum number of time utilization. What a surprise. Well, congratulations to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It has been such a pleasure to listen to the very diverse, atypical, disruptive, and engaging presentations and projects. And more power to you, and look forward to seeing more of the work. And probably if I can be of any help and support, I'll be more than willing to do so. Thank you very much. And hopefully you will join the next sessions, and see you tomorrow again.
See you.
Thank you. And thank you to all the audience and my IT team and my volunteers for backup, and wonderful. Thank you. Thank you and good day. Bye-bye.